Well, following further calls for Netflix to make it clearer that the series is a piece of fiction, today we're joined by King Charles and the Queen Consort's former Communications Secretary, Christina Kiriakou, and it's lovely to see you. Thank you. Welcome back.
Been here.
I mean, John Major, former Prime Minister, has called parts of the show a barrel load of nonsense. Now, you've caught up with some, if not all of it. Being that close to the King when he was Prince of Wales, what do you make of it?
I have to say, I mean, obviously, I can see that it's dramatised, but I think the sadness is that a younger audience coming to the programme may not realise how much drama is within this historical account. And for that reason, I feel that, as with factual accuracy in newspapers, which has come about since the Princess Diana era, that should apply to filmic works as well. And there just should be a clear disclaimer at the beginning of every episode saying this is a dramatised version of historical events.
And there's some things about history we do know, because we've, Diana's book and the interviews that she did, and other certain people have said things, but it's one-sided to a certain point, because obviously the royal family are never going to tell their version of their side of anything, because that's just not what they do.
Holly, that's absolutely correct. It's a one-sided narrative which is now about 30 years old, and the only member of the royal family that spoke publicly about their relationship was Princess Diana. Out of respect to his deceased ex-wife and respect to his children, the King would never speak about that situation and what is a private matter, and nor would the Queen Consort. So it is a one-sided dialogue, and it's a dialogue that's very much been rehashed, and a dialogue that's fuelled by speculation.
And so, does it make it more difficult that in past series of The Crown, when it was a long time ago, and it really was very historical, and you've sort of not got a clue, but it's always fascinating, when you get closer and closer and closer, and you get to pretty much now-ish, these are people who are alive, they are people who could watch, and they are people whom it could hurt.
Absolutely. I think, listen, I don't think that it serves anyone very well to keep rehashing things, but the royal family understand that everything that they do is history, it's historical, it is going to be brought back again. However, the amount of speculation in what I've seen of the current series of The Crown, it seems to be that they've gone for more dramatic emphasis this time. And I did actually listen to a very interesting podcast with Peter Morgan, the scriptwriter for this series, where he says that when he saw Dominic West do the read-through of the initial script, he was so powerful as an actor, it made him go back and rewrite the lines for more dramatic effect. And he's actually said that on the podcast which accompanies this series. So he's admitting to it, and Netflix are admitting to it behind the scenes, but why not just publicly say in front of the episodes
that it's dramatised? There's a scene in particular, and a lot of people feel incredibly uncomfortable with it because of the nature of what's being discussed. And it's a phone call. It was very much publicised at the time between Camilla and Charles. A private conversation. It's something none of us should ever heard. We're not going to talk about. I don't think any of us should be talking about it because it's their thing. If it was in today's current guidelines, it's phone hacking. It would have been illegal. So I think it should be based on that still now. To have that put out there again for everybody to witness and see and talk about and be entertained by, essentially, your private thoughts. I mean, that must be painful for the family.
Holly, you're absolutely right. I mean, what I would say to you is all of us have had private conversations in our lifetime that we very much hope will remain private and not go to family members or loved ones or our children, etc. The other thing I would say is that this is a 30-year dialogue. It was a very, very embarrassing moment, but they dusted themselves off at the time that tape recording was made public and went out and did what they do, which is public service. They went out and greeted people. They met their children at the breakfast table. They looked people in the eye and continued doing what they do best, which is acts of service. And they're used to dusting themselves off. The fact that the phone conversation and certain parts of history in what the Queen described as an annus horribilis are being rehashed will not really affect them. They will be very, very philosophical. And I actually heard a very funny story just the other day, which is that the Queen Consort, so Camilla, invited the previous actress, Emerald Fennell, who played her in the previous series. She invited her in for a reception because she was so keen to meet her. And they got on famously. And that's very much how the King and the Queen Consort are.
So they are watching it, then?
Well, I think the Queen Consort would definitely have been watching it. I don't think the King will have the time. And I don't think that it's probably a programme that would tickle his interest, as it were. But the Queen Consort keeps in touch with her family, her friends. It's an enormous series. And as I say, I think they'll have a philosophical stance. They prefer it wasn't rehashed, but business as usual for them.
We were talking earlier on about Dominic West and his portrayal, which is, he's an incredible actor. But is that the Charles that you know?
Certain parts of it, I think Dominic has got very, very well, I have to say. But it's not the King that I know. I mean, there's been suggestions that he may have been manipulating a plot to overthrow his darling mama and become Prince Regent. And again, this is a 30-year-old moment. But in those 30 years, what did the Prince of Wales do? What has the King done? Supported his mother in every single way possible and shown his acts of love, affection and admiration in every way possible. So is it
possible at the time that the Charles you knew would have had that thought?
Philip, I would say very unlikely that the King would have had any such thought. Certainly very likely that an overzealous communications secretary, I was not an overzealous communications secretary, perhaps some advisors and overzealous people within the household may have had that thought. But to think that the King or the Prince of Wales would have gone along with it, and I think we have to look at Sir John Major and what he has said, and he's described it as complete and utter rubbish. They're now saying that the conversation happened with the previous Prime Minister. But really, was the King part of that conversation? So, as I say, I think everything has to be taken with a pinch of salt. It's an exceptional drama, but that's what it is, a drama.
OK.
And you think it should have a disclaimer?
100% a disclaimer. You want to see what you're getting in the tin with everything. And they have, I believe, added a disclaimer to the YouTube trails, which is strange that they would do that and not do it to everything.
It doesn't make sense, does it?
Yesterday in York, there was a protester who threw 4 eggs at the King. Thankfully, none of them hit their target. He was shouting this country was built on the blood of slaves, and the King just moved on. How would he have been affected by that?
Well, firstly, I would say he'd think it was a waste of 4 eggs because with all his farming and he keeps chickens at Highgrove. So, and I understand that one was caught spectacularly by a member of the royal household. But the other thing is that I understand it was a Green protester. So I'm not quite sure why they would throw eggs at one of the forefathers and advocates of climate change, speaking about climate change since the 1970s, indeed bringing world leaders together just the other week ahead of Sharm and the COP27 summit. So I was a little bit confused about why that happened and what they were protesting about. I do understand that the monarchy is not for everybody, but I don't think that one needs to take to the streets where members of the public are there for enjoyment.
Yeah.
Would he have been? How would he have reacted afterwards, or in his head, or what would he have thought?
Listen, the eggs could have been a gun, etc., etc. They are putting themselves at risk, meeting members of the public every day. But even since the starter pistol was fired at the Trooping of the Colour, the King is very philosophical about these things. This is their duty, and if people want to make expressions or against what they feel the monarchy stands for, then they will take that and move on. And as you see, he just bowed his head and moved on in the graceful, dignified way that we have come to expect from the reigning monarch.
Yeah, dignified duty.
Very
Thank you.
much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.